Alexander Reed was not the kind of man who smiled often. He wore sharp suits, spoke in short sentences, and carried the weight of a $1 billion empire on his shoulders. People feared him, respected him, and never dared ask about his personal life, but every morning, one person walked into his glass office with a quiet confidence. Her name was Emma Blake. Emma had been working as Alexander's assistant for almost 3 years. She wasn't just an assistant, she was the reason his days didn't fall apart. She remembered every meeting, handled every crisis, and knew how to calm him with just a look. She never complained, never asked for more, but in her heart she held a secret that grew heavier with time. She loved him, not because of his money or his status, but because of the man he was when no one else was watching. The man who once stayed with her late at the hospital when her father was ill. The man who sent her books he thought she'd enjoy. The man who always noticed when she changed her hair or wore something new. But never said a word. Alexander noticed Emma too. He admired her dedication, her grace, her way of making chaos seem calm. There were times when he looked at her from behind his laptop and wondered how she always stayed so kind in a world so cruel. But he had learned long ago to bury emotions. Feelings were dangerous. Feelings were distractions. One rainy evening, Alexander sat in his office long after the staff had left. The city lights reflected in the windows like scattered stars. He looked up from his desk to see Emma still typing away outside. She wore a navy blue coat, her hair tied loosely. He watched the way she pushed a strand behind her ear, the way she smiled softly at something on her screen. For a moment, he imagined walking over, sitting beside her, and telling her everything he had never said. But he didn't. Instead, he called her inside, handed her tomorrow's schedule, and said, "You can go now." She nodded, smiled, and left. And just like that, the moment passed. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the office and saw Emma already there. She handed him his coffee, just the way he liked it, black. "No sugar, 2 ice cubes." "Morning, Mr. Reed," she said. He nodded. "Morning." Emma. Their routine was perfect, too perfect that week. A new intern named Daniel joined the company. He was young, smart, and full of charm. Emma helped train him, as she did with all new hires. Alexander didn't pay much attention at first, but one afternoon, he saw Emma laughing with Daniel near the elevator. Her laugh echoed across the hall, light and free, and something inside him twisted. He walked back into his office, closed the door, and stared at his reflection in the dark window. Was he jealous? No, that was ridiculous. Emma was his assistant, his employee. He had no right. Still, that night he didn't sleep well. The next few days felt different. Emma seemed distracted. She was still professional, still precise, but her eyes wandered more. Her phone buzzed more often. She smiled at texts and typed replies quickly when she thought no one was watching. But Alexander was watching, and he hated that he noticed. At a board meeting later that week, Alexander lost track of what someone was saying. His mind kept drifting to Emma. Why did it bother him that she might be talking to someone? Was it just about loyalty? Or was it something else? Leo, Alexander's closest friend and the company's legal advisor, leaned in and whispered, "You okay, man?" "You've been off." Alexander just shook his head. "I'm fine." But he wasn't that night. He stood by the large window of his penthouse. A drink in hand, city below, stars above. He thought about the first day Emma walked into his office fresh out of business school, a little nervous but full of fire. She had changed everything, and now he felt like she was slipping away. Still, he said nothing. Still, he stayed silent. Because Alexander Reed didn't fall in love? And if he did, he never confessed it. He had built walls around his heart. And Emma was the only one who ever got close enough to knock. But now, someone else might be knocking, and Alexander wasn't ready for that. In the quiet corners of his soul, a storm was building, and deep down, he knew if he didn't act soon, he might lose her forever. Emma Blake wasn't used to dressing up for herself. Every morning, she wore neat work clothes, tied her hair back, and made sure nothing about her presence distracted from her role. But tonight was different. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the soft pearl earrings her friend had gifted her last Christmas. She wore a graceful black dress not too bold, but just enough to remind herself that she was more than an assistant. The charity gala was being held at the city's art museum. Alexander had been invited but decided not to attend. Instead, he sent Emma as his representative. She didn't mind. In fact, she welcomed the break from her routine. The museum was glowing under soft lights and gentle music. Emma smiled politely, shook hands, and mingled with business partners she had only emailed before. She felt out of place at first until someone behind her said, "You're definitely not from the finance department." She turned around to see a tall man in a light gray suit. His smile warm and disarming. "Ryan Carter," he said, offering a hand. "Architect, part-time admirer of beautiful art." Emma laughed lightly, shaking his hand. "Emma Blake, executive assistant to a man who hates social events." "Then lucky for me he didn't show up," Ryan replied with a wink. They started talking first about the museum, then about travel, dreams, and stories of late-night work emails. Unlike most people Emma met through work, Ryan wasn't trying to impress her. He was just real as the night went on. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. Ryan had a calm, playful energy. He didn't care about billion-dollar companies or powerful boardrooms. He cared about people, about buildings that told stories, about dogs, sunsets, and street food the next morning. Emma walked into the office a little more awake. She smiled at her phone before placing it on silent. Alexander noticed. He didn't ask, but he noticed during lunch. He saw her typing a message and smiling again. He tried to ignore it, but his mind was already writing stories. He didn't know who she was texting, but whoever it was, they were getting the smile that used to be his alone. That evening, Alexander sat in his office longer than usual. Through the glass wall, he watched Emma packing up her bag. She looked peaceful, her movements slow, thoughtful. She wasn't rushing out of exhaustion like she used to. She was glowing just as she reached the door. She turned back slightly, catching his gaze. "Good night." "Mr. Reed," she said gently. "Good night," he replied, but his voice didn't sound like him. It sounded distant, tired, and unsure. Over the next few days, Emma and Ryan began to see more of each other. Morning coffee turned into weekend walks. Text messages turned into late-night calls. Ryan would sometimes wait outside her office just to say hello. Always respectful, always kind. One afternoon, Alexander exited the elevator just in time to see Ryan handing Emma a coffee. Their fingers brushed, they both smiled, and Alexander froze. His heart didn't beat faster, it stopped. For a second, the world felt quiet. He turned away before they saw him and walked back into the elevator without a word. He didn't know how to explain the tightness in his chest. It wasn't rage, it was loss, but how could he lose something he never had the courage to claim? Back in his office, Alexander tried to bury himself in spreadsheets. He clicked through emails, signed documents, approved budgets. But all he could think about was Emma, the sound of her laughter, the soft perfume she wore, the way she once looked at him that way. He thought of all the times he could have said something, all the nights she stayed late, the birthdays she remembered, the silence she filled with patience, and how he gave her nothing in return except clipped words and cold walls. Leo noticed the change in him. "You've been weird lately," Leo said casually one evening in the company gym. Alexander didn't reply. Just kept hitting the punching bag harder and harder. "Is it Emma?" Leo finally asked. Alexander stopped, breathless. "She's seeing someone," he admitted softly. Leo raised a brow. "And you're only just realizing you care?" Alexander dropped his gloves and walked away. He hated admitting weakness, but this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about regret. A week later, Emma arrived at the office wearing a soft pink scarf. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. Ryan had walked her in and waved goodbye from the street. Alexander stood behind his glass wall and watched like a ghost trapped in his own building. He wanted to say something, to ask her who he was, to tell her she deserved someone who saw her, not just as support, but as the center of everything, but he didn't. Instead, he called her in for a meeting that didn't matter, asked questions he already knew the answers to, just to hear her voice. Just to keep her there a little longer, Emma sensed it. She could feel the weight in his silence, but after 3 years of hoping for a sign, she had stopped waiting. She had started living in Alexander. He was still hiding at the end of the day. Emma walked past his office with her coat draped over her arm. She paused briefly at the door, as if expecting something. But Alexander stayed seated, pretending to read. She gave a quiet smile and left. The moment she disappeared into the elevator, he dropped the file and let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Alexander Reed was known for two things: his brilliant mind and his stone heart. He had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching, built an empire from the ground up, and never once let emotions cloud his judgment. But all that control began to slip the moment he saw Emma standing in the lobby, holding hands with another man. It was late afternoon. He had finished a meeting early and decided to grab coffee from the building cafe. As the elevator doors opened, his eyes landed on Emma. She was smiling in a way he hadn't seen in a long time, eyes shining, cheeks pink, hands gently locked with Ryan's. Ryan leaned in and whispered something into her ear. Emma laughed, touched his arm, and leaned her head on his shoulder for just a second. And in that second, Alexander felt something inside him snap. He didn't step out of the elevator. He let the doors close quietly and rode back up to the top floor, his coffee forgotten, his heart roaring like a storm he had no name for, back in his office. Alexander shut the door and stood in front of the massive glass window overlooking the city. But for once, the view didn't matter. He clenched his fists slowly, remembering every silent moment he had shared with Emma. Every time she waited for him to speak, every time he stayed quiet. Now someone else had filled the silence. The rest of the day dragged like wet cement. Emma returned to her desk upstairs, unaware that Alexander had seen everything. She knocked once and entered his office with her usual calm. "There's an updated version of the Milan contract," she said. Placing a folder on his desk, he didn't even look at her. "Leave it," he replied coldly. Not raising his eyes, Emma paused for a moment, sensing the sudden shift in energy, but she didn't ask. She simply nodded, turned, and walked out, and that hurt more than anything. She had stopped trying to understand him. She had stopped hoping. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, the lights off, a drink untouched on the table. He watched old security footage of the office. He had never done that before, but now he found himself watching clips of Emma walking, laughing, talking to clients, comforting staff. He paused at a moment when she had placed a hand on his shoulder during a stressful meeting. It was just a second, but it had felt like a lifetime. He had ignored all the signs. She had been his right hand, his lifeline, his quiet anchor. But he had treated her like she was temporary, and now, maybe she was. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the office earlier than usual. He thought maybe he'd see her come in, maybe get a chance to say something real. But she was already there, sitting at her desk with headphones in. Her eyes focused on her laptop, and he realized she was already moving on, while he was still standing in the same place. During the leadership briefing, Leo pulled him aside. "You look like hell," Leo said. Keeping his voice low, Alexander gave a tight smile. "Thanks for noticing." Leo folded his arms. "This about Emma?" Alexander stayed silent. Leo didn't need an answer. "I've seen the way you look at her," Leo continued. "It's not business. And it never was." "She's dating someone," Alexander said bitterly. "So?" Leo raised an eyebrow. "You had 3 years, man. What did you expect?" That question echoed in his mind all day. What did he expect? That she'd wait forever? That she'd ignore her own heart just because he refused to face his? At lunch, he called off a meeting just so he could sit in his office and think. He opened his drawer and took out the gift box he had bought for her birthday. Last year, a rare signed copy of her favorite poetry book. He had wrapped it himself, but never gave it. Too afraid it might say more than he was ready to admit. He placed the box on the table and stared at it. So much said in silence. So much lost because of pride later that week. Alexander walked into the break room and found Ryan handing Emma a coffee again. They were laughing about something, Ryan's hand brushing her arm lightly. Emma didn't pull away. She looked happy. Alexander didn't say a word. He just turned and walked back to his office. He stared at his reflection in the glass wall, powerful, respected, feared, but in that moment, he had never felt more powerless. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't erase the nights she waited for him to speak. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to say something now. He reached for his phone, scrolled to her number, thumb hovering over the call button, but then he saw a new message pop up. Emma, will be stepping out early today. Ryan's taking me to meet his sister. His stomach twisted. He set the phone down without replying. He stood by the window once again. But this time, the view looked different, darker, colder. The city kept moving. People kept living, and he just stood there, watching, wishing, too proud to fight, too afraid to fall. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Red, the man who had everything, felt what it was like to have nothing, because the woman he never had the courage to love was slipping into someone else's arms. Emma stood in the elevator, holding the resignation letter in her hand like it weighed 100 pounds. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from heartbreak. She had rewritten the letter 5 times. Every version hurt in a different way, but this one felt final. The doors opened, and she stepped into the familiar office floor. Her heels clicked softly on the marble tiles. She passed the front desk, past the framed awards, past the glass meeting rooms, and stopped in front of his door. Alexander Reed, the man she had stood beside for 3 years, was sitting at his desk, reading a report, pretending to be focused, but when he looked up and saw her holding that envelope, his heart skipped. He already knew what it was, and he wasn't ready for it. Emma walked in slowly, stood before his desk, and placed the envelope down. "I'm resigning," she said gently, her voice steady. "I need to move forward." Alexander didn't speak for a few seconds. He stared at the envelope like it was a threat. His throat felt tight. He finally asked, "Is this because of Ryan?" Emma looked at him, a little surprised. "No," she replied. "It's because of you." Her voice didn't carry anger. "Only truth? You never saw me, not really?" she continued. "You only saw the work I did, not the person I was. I gave everything to this job, hoping maybe one day you'd notice that I cared. Not just professionally, but you never gave me anything real in return." Alexander wanted to say something. Anything. But he couldn't. His tongue was heavy, his heart even heavier. "I thought we were good together," he finally said. "We worked well." Emma nodded. "We did. As a team. But I can't keep living in a waiting room. I don't want to wait for someone who won't open the door." She turned to leave, and then paused at the doorway. "I respected you more than anyone," she whispered. "But I need to respect myself now, too." With that, she walked out of his office, out of his life, leaving behind a silence so loud it rang in his ears. For the rest of that day, Alexander couldn't concentrate. He stared at her empty desk, the cold coffee mug. The chair turned slightly. She was everywhere, and now she was gone. The next morning, his world looked different. His emails piled up, meetings became scattered, and for the first time, he forgot an investor call. Leo stormed into his office, frustrated. "You've lost your grip," he said. "What's going on with you?" Alexander rubbed his forehead, exhausted. "She quit," he said simply. Leo didn't need to ask who. He sat down slowly. "What did you expect, man? You've been in love with her for years, and you never said a word." Alexander stayed silent, then admitted something for the first time. "I thought she'd always be there." "She was," Leo said, "until she couldn't be anymore." Meanwhile, Emma started her new chapter. She took a job with a non-profit organization that helped children with disabilities. The work was different, more personal, more emotional, but deeply fulfilling. She spent her days helping families, organizing programs, and for the first time, felt seen for who she really was. Ryan stood by her, proud of her courage. He never pushed, never pressured, but even he could see the shadow behind her eyes. A piece of her heart was still stuck in that glass tower. One evening, Emma sat on a park bench watching kids play. She smiled, but her thoughts drifted. She remembered the late nights in the office, the quiet glances, the closeness without confession. She had loved a man who never found the words. And maybe he never would, back at the company. Alexander began changing. He stopped barking orders, started listening more. He went into meetings with presence instead of pride, but something was always missing. He kept Emma's name on the payroll. He couldn't bring himself to delete it. Every time he opened his contacts, her number stared back. He thought of calling her 100 times, but always backed out, telling himself she was happier now. And maybe that was all that mattered. One night, while reviewing old project files, he found a handwritten note Emma had once left in a folder. It was a simple reminder: don't forget to eat. You'll need energy for that 4 p.m. call. And yes, I added an extra shot in your coffee like you like it. Don't act surprised. He smiled at the memory, and then his smile faded. He realized she had always cared. In small ways, in big moments, and he had stood behind silence like a coward. A week later, Alexander visited the nonprofit office. He didn't go inside, he stayed across the street. Watching through the glass, Emma was inside, talking to a group of children. Her face glowing with purpose, she laughed, knelt to tie a boy's shoelace, and handed out crayons. She looked free, she looked happy. He could have walked in, could have said something. But instead, he stayed across the road. A man who had learned too late what mattered most that night. He opened his laptop and began typing a speech for the company's 10-year anniversary. It wasn't about profit or growth, it was about loss. About love, about timing, and what happens when you wait too long to speak your truth. Some loves aren't lost in arguments, some are broken by betrayal. Some are lost quietly through silence, hesitation, and the fear of being vulnerable. And Alexander read, the man who once thought he had it all, was left with nothing but echoes of what he never said, and the image of the woman he let walk away. Alexander Reed had faced market crashes, hostile takeovers, and lawsuits worth millions, but nothing felt as heavy as the silence Emma left behind. It filled the halls, the boardroom, and most of all his heart. 2 weeks had passed since her resignation. And yet, every morning, he found himself looking at the door, expecting her to walk in with her usual notebook, calm voice and gentle smile, but she never did. The new assistant he had hired barely lasted 4 days. She was qualified, experienced, and well-spoken. But she wasn't Emma, no one could be. Alexander became distant. Meetings felt like noise. Investors became shadows. He would nod at presentations. But his mind was elsewhere. His thoughts kept drifting to moments that once felt small, now they felt priceless. Like the time Emma stayed late during a snowstorm just to finish a client pitch, or when she brought him lunch on the day his father's will was finalized, or when she gently corrected a senior partner's mistake to save his reputation. He had been surrounded by wolves his whole career, and yet the one person who had truly protected him, he let her go. Leo stormed into his office one afternoon, frustrated. "You missed the China call," he snapped. "That deal was 6 months in the making." Alexander leaned back in his chair, unfazed. Leo shook his head. "You've built walls so high that even you can't see over them anymore." "She's happy now," Alexander replied quietly. Leo stared. "Is she? Or are you just telling yourself that so you don't have to do anything about it?" Alexander didn't respond. He reached into his drawer, pulled out the gift he never gave Emma, the poetry book. Leo looked at it and sighed. "You were going to give that to her, weren't you?" Alexander nodded. "I was," he whispered. "But I waited too long." That night, Alexander wandered into his penthouse balcony. City lights sparkled below, but they meant nothing. He poured himself a drink and stared at the skyline. He remembered her laugh, how it used to soften even his coldest days. He opened his phone and went through old texts. Most were work-related, but in between were little messages that now felt like gold. "Emma, you should try sleeping more, CAO or not. You're still human, Emma. I ordered your favorite tea. It arrives tomorrow. Emma, don't forget tomorrow's your mother's memorial." He never replied to those texts with more than a thanks, and now he wished he had said so much more. Meanwhile, Emma had fully embraced her new world. The nonprofit office was smaller. The pay lower, but her heart was finally full. She organized school supplies for children with disabilities, helped mothers apply for aid, and taught basic computer skills to teenagers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. Ryan supported her. He picked her up after work, cooked dinner, and even helped paint the walls of the small center. He was kind, thoughtful, and present. But something was missing. He could feel it in her silences. In the way she looked out the window a little too long. In the way she smiled politely when he brought up the future. One night they sat at the dinner table, and Ryan asked, "Emma, are you truly happy?" She looked at him, then away. "I'm grateful," she said. "I feel alive here. But are you happy with me?" He asked softly. Emma didn't answer right away. She reached for his hand, gave a small squeeze. "I'm trying," she said, her voice gentle. "You've been wonderful to me," Ryan gave a sad smile. "But your heart's still somewhere else, isn't it?" She couldn't lie. She nodded slowly, back in his office. Alexander was preparing for the company's 10-year anniversary event. It was supposed to be a celebration, but he had no desire to party. Still, he knew the board expected a speech, something polished, powerful, unforgettable. He sat in front of a blank page for hours then. Instead of writing about profits and growth, he started typing from his heart. He wrote about silence, about missed chances, about the one person who gave him everything and received nothing in return. It wasn't a business speech, it was a confession. The night of the event arrived. The hall was packed with CEOs, investors, media, and employees. Camera lights flashed, champagne glasses clinked, and music played in the background. Alexander stood backstage, holding his speech. His hands slightly shaking, Leo clapped him on the back. "If you're ever going to say it now." Alexander walked onto the stage under bright lights. The crowd went quiet, expecting the usual confident corporate address. He looked at the audience, then looked into the cameras knowing Emma might be watching. He took a deep breath and began, "I built this company to feel powerful, untouchable, but in chasing success, I forgot what really mattered." He paused. "I lost someone," he said. Voice lower, "Not to death, not to distance, but to silence. I never told her how much she meant to me. I thought professionalism meant not showing emotions, but what I didn't realize was kindness. Loyalty and love are not weaknesses. They are everything." The audience was stunned. Some whispered, some watched with wide eyes. Alexander continued, "If there's someone in your life you care about, don't wait. Say it, show it." Before the moment passes, Emma watched the speech on her phone from her apartment. She sat frozen, her heart racing. Tears filled her eyes as she listened to the words she had waited years to hear. Not spoken in private, but in front of the world. She touched the screen lightly and whispered, "Why now?" That night, Ryan came over, saw her tear-streaked face, and smiled sadly. "He finally said it, didn't he?" Emma nodded, not knowing what to say. Ryan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've always loved him," he said, "and I love you enough to let you go." Emma cried in his arms, not because of loss, but because of honesty. Ryan kissed her forehead, stood up, and walked away without bitterness. Love didn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it meant letting go. The video of Alexander Reed's speech spread like wildfire. It was shared by business pages, personal blogs, and even relationship advice columns. A billionaire who spoke of love and regret instead of profits and expansion. People were moved, but no one was more shaken than Emma Blake. She watched it 3 times, the first time in silence, the second time in disbelief, and the third time with tears running down her cheeks. Every word he spoke felt like a key unlocking her memories. The late nights, the coffee breaks, the glances he thought she didn't notice, the kindness he showed in hidden ways, the love she had waited years to hear about finally spoken. But why now? Why after everything? Why not when she stood in front of him with her heart open and hands empty? She stared at her phone long after the video ended. Her emotions tangled like threads in the wind. She knew this moment was a turning point, but she didn't know which way to turn across town. Alexander sat in his penthouse alone. The speech was done, the crowd had cheered, But none of that mattered if she wasn't there. He looked out at the glowing city skyline. And for once, the lights felt distant, not comforting. His home felt bigger than ever, but emptier too. Leo had texted him a simple message. Proud of you. Now go find her before it's too late. Alexander picked up his phone. Scrolled through his contacts. Her name was still saved as Emma. Aya. He smiled softly and edited to just Emma. He typed a message, deleted it, typed again, and deleted it once more. Nothing felt good enough. Nothing captured everything he needed to say. So he did something he never did. He decided to go in person. Meanwhile, Emma had made a decision of her own. She needed to clear her heart before she could move forward. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive, but she knew she was ready to listen the next morning. She walked into her nonprofit center and told her supervisor she'd be taking the afternoon off. She didn't say where she was going. She just smiled, took a breath, and stepped into the sunlight. Alexander arrived at the nonprofit around noon. He parked across the street again, heart racing. He saw her through the window, her hands busy with children's drawings. But her face looked calm, focused. She belonged here in a way he never truly understood until now. He walked across the street, paused at the door, then slowly stepped inside. Emma looked up and froze. Their eyes locked across the small hallway. Time seemed to slow, noise faded. She stood up quietly, walked toward him. Neither of them spoke at first, then Alexander finally whispered. "Hi," Emma gave a small nod. "Hi," he looked around, nervous. "Can we talk?" She thought for a moment, then said, "There's a garden behind the building." They walked together in silence, not like strangers, not like lovers. Just two people carrying a storm inside, in the garden. They sat on a wooden bench under a tree. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the world felt oddly still. Alexander turned to her, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I'm late," he said. "I've been late with everything that mattered." Emma looked straight ahead. "Not ready to meet his eyes?" "I waited," she said quietly. "For a long time, I know," he replied. "I was afraid, Emma." "Afraid of what?" she asked, finally turning to face him. "Of needing you," he confessed. "Of losing control." She gave a faint, sad smile. "You already lost me." "I know," he said again, this time softer. "And that's the regret I'll carry forever." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I bought this last year," he said, "but I was too proud to give it to you." He placed it gently on her lap. Inside was the signed poetry book she once mentioned in passing. Emma opened the lid slowly, her breath catching. "I can't believe you remembered," she whispered. "I remembered everything," he said. "I just didn't act on it." There was a long pause. Then Emma asked, "Do you love me because I left? Or did you love me when I was still there?" Alexander didn't hesitate. "I loved you every single day. Even when I didn't know how to show it, I loved you when you reminded me to eat. When you stayed late to finish reports, when you argued with clients just to protect me, and I love you now." "Even more," Emma's eyes welled up again. "But how can I trust this isn't just guilt?" she asked. "Because guilt fades," Alexander replied. "But this ache in my chest, it only grows. I don't want to run a company if I can't have you by my side." She looked away, tears falling quietly. "I don't want to go back to the way things were," she said. "I can't just be your assistant again." He took her hand gently. "Then don't," he said. "Be my partner, in life and love. In anything you choose." They sat quietly, the air full of unspoken forgiveness and slowly blooming hope. The past couldn't be undone, but maybe it could be healed. Alexander whispered, "I love you, Emma. Not because you make my life easier, but because you made it real." Emma looked into his eyes, saw the sincerity, the pain, and the man he never let anyone else see. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not out of habit, but from the heart. Later that evening, as they walked out of the garden together, the sun dipped low behind the buildings, painting the sky in soft gold. And just like that, two people who had loved in silence for too long began to speak in light. Asterisk, 3 weeks had passed since that quiet conversation in the garden. 3 weeks since Alexander finally confessed his love. 3 weeks of unanswered questions and heavy hearts. Emma had stayed distant, not out of anger, but uncertainty. She needed time, space, clarity. She had spent years building her life around him. She couldn't rush into rebuilding it again. Meanwhile, Alexander waited. He didn't pressure her, didn't call repeatedly, but every night he stared at his phone, hoping for a message that never came. Then, one morning, Leo barged into Alexander's office. His expression urgent, voice sharp. "She's leaving," he said. Alexander looked up, confused. "Leaving where?" "Abroad," Leo replied. "I just spoke with someone from the nonprofit. She's flying to Ghana for a 6-month humanitarian program with Ryan's organization." The name hit Alexander like a punch to the chest. Ryan, the man who had been beside her when he hadn't. The man who had given her attention when all Alexander gave her was silence. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his coat. "Which airport?" "Gina International," Leo answered, already tossing him the car keys. "You have 2 hours before the flight." Traffic in Karachi was brutal. The clock ticked faster than the car could move. Alexander's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His mind racing faster than the engine, he thought about everything she had done for him. The birthdays she remembered, the books she gifted, the quiet support she always offered. He had taken her presence for granted. Now he was racing against time just for a final chance to be near it again. He remembered the way her eyes looked the day she walked away. Not angry, but tired of being invisible. And now, if he didn't act, she'd disappear for real at the airport. Emma stood near the departure gate with her carry-on and passport in hand. Her heart was heavy but calm. She wasn't running away. She was stepping forward, doing something that mattered to her. Still, a part of her kept looking back. Ryan stood beside her, quietly watching her. He had noticed she hadn't smiled the same way since the day Alexander confessed. He could feel her heart drifting, and that made his decision easier. "Emma," he said gently, "are you sure this is what you want?" She looked at him, eyes soft. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. "But I know I need to find it alone," Ryan nodded. "You're braver than you think," he said. "And no matter what happens, I'm glad I got to be part of your story." He kissed her forehead and stepped back. "Go find your truth," he said. "I already did," she whispered back. "I just haven't accepted it yet." Back at the entrance, Alexander ran past security, breathless. "International departures?" He asked the front desk. The clerk pointed. "Gate 14. Final boarding." He sprinted through the terminal. Suit slightly wrinkled, eyes wild with emotion. People turned to stare. He didn't care. He reached the gate just as the boarding door was closing. Emma was walking toward it, one step away from a new world. One step away from leaving him behind forever. "Emma!" He called out. She froze. The sound of his voice cut through the airport noise like thunder. She turned around slowly. Her eyes widened as she saw him standing there. Breathless, desperate, tears instantly welled up in her eyes. Alexander walked toward her, chest heaving. "I can't let you leave without hearing this," he said. "I know I was late. I know I was silent when I should have spoken. But I'm here now. And I'm not holding back anymore." Emma stood still. Shocked, overwhelmed, passengers moved around them like shadows. But in that moment, it felt like the world had paused. "I don't want to be the man who loved you quietly," he continued. "I want to be the man who holds your hand in public, who tells you he loves you every morning, who fights for you when life gets hard. I want to be the man you never have to guess about again." Emma's lips trembled. "You waited until the last second," she whispered. "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I'd rather fight for 1 second of your heart than live a lifetime without it." She looked at him. Really looked at him. The guarded, cold billionaire was gone. Before her stood a man raw, honest, open. "I had to leave to know what I truly needed," she said quietly. "And now?" he asked, voice soft. She smiled through her tears. "Now I know." She dropped her passport and walked into his arms, right there in the middle of the airport, with strangers watching, cameras clicking, and final boarding calls echoing in the background. She kissed him slow, real, filled with years of longing. Alexander held her like a man who had lost everything and just found it again. And in that moment, neither of them cared about flights, plans, or the past. All that mattered was this: they had finally arrived at the same place. Together later, they sat in a quiet cafe near the terminal. Emma sipping tea, Alexander still catching his breath. "So," she teased, "you really chased me through an airport?" "I'll chase you through the ends of the earth if I have to," he replied. Smirking, "You already did," she smiled. "And you caught me." He reached across the table, took her hand. "No more silence," he promised. "Not ever again?" She nodded. "No more waiting?" 6 months had passed since the airport. 6 months since Alexander ran through a crowded terminal to win back the only woman who ever made his world feel real. 6 months since Emma walked away from a boarding gate and stepped back into his arms instead. Their lives were no longer divided by glass walls and cold meetings. They now sat side by side at home, in life and love. Alexander had changed. He still wore suits, still signed billion-dollar deals, still ran meetings with quiet power, but something about him was softer now. He laughed more, he listened more, and most of all, he loved out loud. Emma didn't return as his assistant. That chapter was closed. She became his partner, both in life and in their shared mission to create something that mattered. Together, they launched the Reed Foundation for Human Potential, an organization focused on education, health, and support for underprivileged children. Alexander funded it, Emma designed it. They poured their hearts into it. They traveled across countries visiting schools, meeting children, talking to local leaders. Emma would kneel to hug every child. Alexander would stand behind her, smiling like a man who finally understood what it meant to live. One evening, as the sun set over a village school they helped rebuild in northern Pakistan, they stood side by side watching children laugh and play. Alexander turned to her. "You've changed me," he whispered. Emma smiled. "No, I just reminded you who you already were." He held her hand. "I used to chase power because it was the only thing I could control. But with you, I've learned that real strength comes from surrender." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were never weak," she said, "just scared of being loved. And now?" he asked. She looked into his eyes. "Now you're fearless, back in the city." Their love became something others looked up to. People no longer called Emma the assistant. They called her Mrs. Reed. But she still insisted on being called Emma. Because she hadn't changed who she was, she had only found the space to be fully herself. Every morning, Alexander would make her tea. Not because he had to, but because it was his quiet way of saying, "I see you," every evening. She'd leave little notes in his briefcase, not reminders, just love. "You're doing great. Don't forget to breathe today. Dinner's your turn again." They became each other's home. One afternoon, while organizing old files in their new shared office, Emma found a dusty black folder. Inside was her original resume from the day she applied to be his assistant. Her heart swelled as she read the old, simple lines: willing to grow, willing to learn, hoping to make a difference. She turned to Alexander with a playful smile. "Did you hire me because of this?" He grinned, walking over. "No, I hired you because you looked me in the eye when everyone else avoided it," she laughed. "And now I'm stuck with you forever." "Lucky me," he said. Pulling her close, later that week, the Reed Foundation hosted a global education summit. It was their biggest event yet. World leaders, educators, and philanthropists gathered in one grand hall. Emma took the stage to speak, graceful, confident, inspiring. Alexander watched her from the front row. His heart full, she ended her speech by saying, "We don't build futures with money. We build them with love, with truth, and with courage. And sometimes, courage means telling someone what they mean to you before it's too late." The audience applauded. But Alexander's eyes glistened. He remembered the years he kept silent. And the moment he finally broke free, that night, in their candle-lit apartment overlooking the city, Alexander brought out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel, didn't plan a speech. He just opened it quietly, revealing a simple gold ring. Emma stared, heart beating fast. "This isn't about marriage," he said. "It's about promise, a promise to never go silent again." a promise to love you in public. In private, in every room we enter, in every place we stand. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. To all of it, he slipped the ring onto her finger, not as a symbol of possession, but of partnership, of peace, of finally coming home. And so, the story that began in silence ended in melody, not the kind you hear in music, but the kind you feel when two hearts finally learn to speak. The billionaire and his assistant were never just roles. They were two souls circling each other in quiet longing, until fate, regret, and courage brought them together. Now their love was no longer a secret. It was a truth they lived every single day, loud, proud, and beautifully real.